My sister's rehearsal dinner had 42 place settings, white linen napkins folded into cranes, 3 kinds of wine glasses at each plate. The caterer had driven in from the city. I know this because I was the one who recommended her. 18 months ago, when my sister first started planning and still returned my calls. I counted the place settings from the doorway. 42. I counted them twice. There were 43 people on the guest list. The math was not an accident. My father was already seated. He had not saved me a chair. Welcome to Hidden Family Revenge, the channel where families' darkest secrets meet the people brave enough to expose them. If stories about justice and boundaries keep you coming back, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Now, let me tell you how a missing chair changed everything, but first, you need to know about a kitchen counter. My mother's kitchen counter was laminate, cream-colored with flecks that were supposed to look like granite but didn't. She talked about replacing it every spring. When the store does well this quarter, she'd say. The store never did well enough. The counter stayed. She taught me to chop onions on that counter when I was 9, held my hand over the knife, showed me how to curl my fingers so I wouldn't cut myself. Margot was in the next room watching cartoons. Mom called her in twice. Margot came the second time, watched for maybe 30 seconds, then drifted back to the couch. Mom didn't force it. The kitchen feeds people, she told me once, sliding caramelized onions onto a cast-iron skillet. The whole house smelled like butter and patience. The dining room impresses them. Know which room you belong in, Arya? I was 11. I didn't understand what she meant. I just liked being the one she taught. My father usually came home late from the hardware store. Mom kept his plate in the oven, covered with foil. He'd eat standing at that counter, still in his work boots, reading the mail. Mom would lean against the fridge and watch him, her arms crossed, a dish towel over one shoulder. They didn't talk much during those dinners. They didn't need to. The routine was the conversation. When Mom got sick, the meals stopped first. Then the standing at the counter dinners. Then the routine. My father started eating at restaurants. First because he couldn't cook. Then because he couldn't sit in that kitchen without looking at the empty spot by the fridge where she used to lean. I took over. I cooked his meals. I kept his plate warm. I stood where she stood. That counter is still in my father's house. He never replaced it. He never learned to cook either. But he replaced other things. He replaced the photographs on the mantel. Mom's candid shots swapped for posed pictures of Margot and Drew, the kind taken by a professional with soft lighting and coordinated outfits. He replaced the Sunday dinners I made with restaurant reservations at places the Prescotts recommended. He replaced the quiet that held us together with a noise that pushed me out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That all came later. When it started, it looked like something much simpler. It looked like a sister who stopped calling. Margot used to follow me everywhere. When I was 12 and she was 7, she'd trail me to the mailbox and back like it was an expedition. She copied my homework until she was old enough to have her own. She'd knock on my door at midnight and ask to sleep in my bed because the wind sounded like something else through her window. She was the kind of kid who needed someone nearby at all times. Not talking, just nearby. I didn't mind. When Mom was diagnosed, ovarian cancer, stage 3, Margot was 23 and living in San Diego with a marketing job she'd gotten 3 months earlier. She came home once during the first round of chemo. She sat in the hospital room for 40 minutes. She held Mom's hand. She didn't come back for 6 weeks. I was 28. I took a leave from work. I moved into the spare room at my parents' house. For 14 months, I managed the medications, the insurance calls, the oncologist visits, the home nurse schedules. I learned which blankets didn't irritate her skin after treatment. I learned that she liked the hospital hallway better than the room because the fluorescent light there didn't buzz. Margot called twice a week for the first 2 months, then once a week. Then she sent texts. Then she sent nothing. Mom died on a Thursday. Margot flew home on Friday. I don't blame her for leaving. Some people can't watch someone they love become less of themselves. Margot wasn't built for that kitchen. She told me as much once, standing at the airport curb after the funeral. I couldn't watch it, Arya. You were always stronger than me. She said it like a compliment. It wasn't. What I blame her for happened after. Over the next year, Margot returned to San Diego, met Drew Prescott at a charity gala, and began building a new story. In Margot's version, she had wanted to stay during Mom's illness, desperately. But I had taken control of everything and shut her out. In Margot's version, she was the grieving daughter who was never given space to grieve. She didn't just rewrite the story, she cast herself as the lead. And the Prescotts, who had never met me, had no reason not to believe her. I met Drew Prescott exactly once before the engagement party. Margot brought him home for Thanksgiving, 10 months after Mom's death. He was tall, polite, and entirely blank. The kind of man who shook your hand firmly and said, "So nice to meet you," with a smile that was warm but imprecise, like he'd given it to every person in the room and had a limited supply. He talked about his job at the family's commercial real estate firm the way someone talks about a car they inherited. Not with passion, with acceptance. The Prescotts were old money. Not the kind that builds stadiums, the kind that names library wings and endows scholarships and gets a table at the club without asking. Drew's mother, Patricia, organized benefit dinners. Drew's father, Richard, played golf with judges. And Drew's grandmother, Vivien Prescott, was the actual center of the family. Not because she talked the loudest, but because when she stopped talking, everyone else stopped too. My father met the Prescotts and something shifted behind his eyes. It was subtle, like watching someone recalculate in real time. Within 2 months, he was wearing a sport coat to dinner. He ordered bourbon he couldn't pronounce. He started talking about growth potential for the hardware store and dropped hints about partnership opportunities. I watched my father turn from a man who ate standing at a laminate counter into a man who rehearsed small talk in the bathroom mirror. He didn't do it badly. He did it desperately. And the desperation was the part that hurt. One night after a dinner with the Prescotts, I drove him home. He'd had 3 glasses of wine, one more than his limit. I said, "You don't have to impress them, Dad." He looked out the window. "You don't understand how business works, Arya. We're a hardware store." He didn't answer. I dropped him off. His cologne lingered in my car for 2 days. It wasn't his usual brand. It was something new, something expensive, something that smelled like a man who wanted to be someone else. My mother died in a hospital bed. My father disappeared in a restaurant booth, shaking hands with people whose last name he practiced pronouncing in the rearview mirror on the way over. I started volunteering at the Millbrook Public Library when Mom was in her 3rd month of chemo. It wasn't a noble decision. It was survival. I needed 1 hour a week where nobody was sick, nobody was scared, and the biggest problem was whether to read Goodnight Moon or Corduroy to a circle of 4-year-olds sitting on a braided rug. The children's reading hour ran every Tuesday and Thursday. Mom had started it, years ago, before I was old enough to remember. The librarian, Doris, told me this on my first day. "Helen used to sit in that exact chair," she said, pointing to a cracked wooden rocker near the window. I sat in it. It creaked when I leaned back. It felt right. After Mom died, I kept going. Tuesday, Thursday. The kids changed. They grew up. New ones came. But the chair stayed, and so did I. Vivien Prescott started appearing at the library about 2 years after Mom's death. She came in on Tuesdays, always around 10, carrying a canvas bag of donated books. She'd sit at the long table near the reference section and sort them by age group, peeling off price stickers with a careful thumbnail. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and plain cotton blouses. If you didn't know her last name, you'd think she was a retired school teacher. We talked the way library volunteers talk, about shelf labels, late returns, which picture books had the best illustrations. She asked me about my job. I told her I was a project manager at a construction firm. She asked what that meant in practice. I explained. Timelines, budgets, subcontractor wrangling, fixing problems before clients noticed them. "You run things," she said. "I keep things from falling apart," I said. She smiled at that. A small, measured smile. Same thing. I didn't know at the time that she knew my last name. I didn't know she'd already heard Margot's version of our family, the version where I was the unstable older sister who'd struggled after Mom's death. I didn't know Vivien had been watching me for weeks, comparing the woman she saw at the library with the woman Margot described. She asked me my name on our third week. I told her. She didn't flinch. I would learn, much later, that she already knew it. She'd been waiting to see if I would lie. The engagement party was held at the Prescott house, a stone colonial with a wraparound porch and a garden that looked like it had been designed by someone who charged by the rosebush. 8 months before the wedding. I wore a navy dress I'd bought on clearance. I thought I looked fine. Margot introduced me to Drew's parents in the foyer, near a grandfather clock that probably cost more than my car. This is my sister Aria. She works in construction. She said the last word the way you'd say taxidermy at a dinner party. Technically accurate, socially regrettable. Patricia Prescott smiled and said, "How interesting." Her eyes moved past me to the next guest before she'd finished the sentence. I circulated, made small talk, complimented the canapes. Nobody offered me champagne. A waiter passed 3 times. Each time his tray went to the cluster of people behind me. I wasn't being refused. I was being unseen. My father found me on the porch. He was holding a glass of champagne. He pulled me aside, one hand on my elbow. "Don't talk too much about work tonight." "Why?" "They think we're... Just don't mention the construction thing. Or the store." "Dad, we are blue collar. That's not a disease." He squeezed my elbow once. "Just tonight, Aria. Please." I watched him walk back inside. He'd lost weight. The sport coat fit better now. He moved through the Prescott's living room like a man who'd studied the floor plan in advance, knowing which groups to approach and which to admire from a distance. Vivien was there. I saw her across the room, seated in a wingback chair near the fireplace. She wasn't circulating. She was watching. Our eyes met once. She gave me the same small, measured smile from the library. I didn't go over to her. I didn't know yet that she was Drew's grandmother. I just thought she was a nice woman who liked books. I drove home that night alone. My father had gotten a ride with the Prescotts. His cologne was still in the car from the last time. Or maybe it was permanent now. Maybe the car had absorbed it the way old houses absorb smoke. I opened my window. Cold air came in. It helped. After the engagement party, the calls thinned out like trees at the edge of a forest. Gradually, then all at once. Margot stopped calling on Sundays. Then she stopped texting on weekdays. Then the only messages I received from her were logistics. "Dad's birthday is the 14th. Can you handle the cake?" And, "Don't forget Mom's flowers in March." I handled the cake. I brought the flowers. I did not mention that I was the only one who remembered where the florist was, or that Mom liked white peonies, not roses. My father called every 10 days or so. Short calls. "Everything okay?" "Yep." "Good." "Okay. Talk soon." We didn't talk soon. We talked in the same intervals as before, but the space between the words got wider, like a road that looks the same but somehow takes longer to drive. I continued at the library. Vivien continued too. Our Tuesday conversations grew longer. Not dramatically, just by a few minutes each week. She asked about my family once. "Do you see your father often?" "When he needs something moved or fixed," I said. She nodded. She didn't ask about Margot. She didn't need to. I found the box in late October. It was in the hall closet at my father's house, behind a plastic bin of Christmas lights. I was looking for the extension cord to fix the porch light. Dad had asked, naturally. The box was a shoebox, taped shut, with Mom's handwriting on the side. Letters, not yet. Inside were 6 envelopes, 3 addressed to Margot, 3 addressed to me. None of them had been mailed. The stamps were unused. I opened one of mine. The paper was thin, the ink slightly faded. Mom's handwriting tilted to the right, the way it always did when she wrote on the couch. "Dear Aria," it said, "I know what I'm asking you to carry. I know it's more than your share. You don't complain. That worries me. Because the people who don't complain are the ones who forget they're allowed to stop. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to put it down when it breaks your back. Love, Mom. I read it twice. I folded it. I put it in my wallet, behind my driver's license, where it would stay for the next 8 months. I did not put anything down. Not yet. 4 months before the wedding, Margot called. Not a text. An actual phone call. I saw her name on the screen and stared at it for 2 full rings before answering. I need help with the vendors, she said. No hello. No, how are you? Just the need, laid out flat like a bill on a counter. I said yes. Of course I said yes. The word came out before I'd decided to say it, the way a reflex works. Your hand pulls back from the stove before your brain registers the heat. Over the next 3 weeks, I coordinated the florist, confirmed the caterer, vetted the string quartet, negotiated a discount on the linen rental, and handled a last-minute venue panic when the original tent supplier double-booked. Margot sent me task lists. I completed them. She sent more. I completed those too. She never said thank you. I'm not sure she noticed there was something to thank me for. To Margot, this was what I did. This was what I was for. The fitting room incident happened on a Saturday. Margot had asked me to come along to the bridal shop, not for the gown that had been chosen months ago, but for the bridesmaids' dresses. The bridal party was 4 of Margot's college friends and Drew's sister. Not me. I was not in the bridal party. You're better with logistics, Margot had explained when I asked. She said it the way someone says you're taller or you're left-handed, as if it were a fixed trait that excluded me from the other category by definition. At the shop, the bridesmaids went behind a heavy velvet curtain. I sat on a tufted chair outside, near a 3-way mirror that reflected versions of myself I didn't want to examine. Through the curtain, I could hear everything. Is your sister coming to the wedding? One of them asked. Of course. She's just not... She's better behind the scenes. Margot's voice was light, practiced. She's the kind of person who likes to run things, you know? Not the kind who stands in the photo. They laughed. A comfortable, collective laugh. The kind that means everyone agreed before the joke was made. The curtain was thin enough to hear everything. It was thick enough that they forgot I was there. Vivien's garden was behind her house, enclosed by a low stone wall that she said her husband had built 40 years ago, before he died. The stones were uneven, the mortar cracked in places, and every spring Vivien repaired it herself with a trowel and a bucket of mix from the hardware store. She told me this the first time she invited me for tea, 3 months before the wedding, on a Tuesday afternoon after the reading hour. I buy the mortar from Finch Hardware, she said, pouring from a ceramic pot. Earl Grey. The cup was so thin I could see the shadow of my fingers through the porcelain. Your father's store. I set my cup down. You know who I am. I've known since the first week. Why didn't you say anything? She placed a lavender sprig on the saucer between us. The breeze carried the smell across the table. Lavender and warm stone and something floral I couldn't name. Because I wanted to know you before I knew about you, she said. There's a difference. She told me then what Margot had told the family, that I'd had emotional problems after Mom's death. That I'd been difficult and controlling. That I'd lashed out, and the family had given me space to work through it. Drew believes it, Vivien said. Patricia believes it. Richard believes it. She sipped her tea. I don't. Why not? Because I've spent 60 Tuesdays watching you read picture books to children who can't sit still, and you've never once raised your voice. Because the librarian told me you've covered the cost of 6 replacement books out of your own pocket without being asked. Because I have lived 78 years, Arya, and I know the difference between someone who is struggling and someone whose family needs her to look like she's struggling. I didn't know what to say, so I picked up my teacup and held it with both hands. The porcelain was warm. The garden was quiet. A cardinal sat on the wall and watched us like a small red critic. What are you going to do? I asked. Vivien set her cup down with a quiet click. I'm going to keep watching, she said. That's what grandmothers do. The guest list was a shared spreadsheet on Margot's Google Drive. She'd given me access because I was handling the seating chart for the rehearsal dinner, One more logistics task she'd offloaded with the casual confidence of someone handing a coat to a valet. I found my name at 2 in the morning. I wasn't looking for it. I was sorting RSVPs by dietary restriction, which is the kind of sentence that summarizes my role in this family better than anything else I could say. Row 43. My name. Highlighted in red. Next to it, in the notes column, 3 words. TBD. Discuss with D. D was Drew. My sister was discussing with her fiancé whether or not to invite me to her wedding. My name was highlighted the same color as shellfish allergy and wheelchair access needed, a logistical complication to be resolved. I stared at the screen for a long time. The laptop cast a blue glow on my hands. The house was silent. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped, as if it had said its piece. I took a screenshot, saved it to a folder on my desktop. Then I closed the spreadsheet, finished the seating chart, and emailed it to Margot at 2:47 in the morning. I did not include a note. I called Vivien the next afternoon, after the reading hour. I told her what I'd found. Silence on the line, the kind that has weight. She highlighted my name in red. I said, "I heard you. What should I do?" Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear her garden through the phone, wind through hedges, the faint click of wind chimes she kept on the porch. "Come to the rehearsal dinner," she said. "Sit where they put you, or where they don't. What will that accomplish? It will show them exactly who they are, and it will show you exactly who you're done being." She didn't tell me what would happen. She didn't promise anything. She told me to show up. That was all. I'd spent 5 years showing up for people who had stopped showing up for me. One more night wouldn't kill me, but it might be the last one. My father asked me to help with inventory at the store on a Wednesday. This was not unusual. Gerald Finch had been asking me to help with things since the day after Mom's funeral, and I had been saying yes with the regularity of a metronome. The store was the same as always. Sawdust smell, fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency just below annoying, pegboard walls lined with hooks and brackets, and things people needed when something in their house broke. It was an honest place. My father had built it with his hands and my mother's bookkeeping, and for 30 years it had kept us fed and clothed and unremarkable. I was counting boxes of galvanized nails when I found the envelope. It was wedged between 2 binders on the shelf above the register. Not hidden, exactly, but not displayed. A business envelope, cream-colored, with a return address I recognized. Prescott Capital Group, LLC. Inside was a promissory note. $85,000, borrowed from Richard Prescott personally, secured against the store's inventory. 18 months old. 3 payments missed. I put the note back. I closed the binder. I finished counting the nails. In the car afterward, I sat with the engine running and my hands on the steering wheel and tried to do the math of my father's choices. Not the financial math, the human math. He hadn't chosen Margot over me because he loved her more. He hadn't sided with the Prescotts because he admired them. He'd borrowed $85,000 from Richard Prescott, and every time he waved me off, every time he told me to be quiet, every time he chose Margot's comfort over mine, he was making a payment on a debt he couldn't afford to default on. If the wedding fell apart, the Prescotts would call the loan. The store would go under. 30 years of my parents' work. Gone. My father had not chosen my sister over me. He had sold the choice a long time ago, and he'd been paying interest ever since. I understood him then. Not forgave. Understood. There's a difference, and it matters. Forgiving means the debt is cleared. Understanding means you see exactly how much it cost, and you stop pretending the math was fair. 2 weeks before the wedding, my father asked me to clear out the spare bedroom. The Prescotts were sending a few out-of-town relatives, and Gerald wanted the room presentable. This meant remove the evidence that a real person had once lived there. The room was Margot's old bedroom. Pink walls she'd painted over with lavender at 16. Poster residue on the ceiling from a boy band she'd loved fiercely and forgotten completely. A desk where she used to do homework while listening to music so loud I could feel the bass through the wall we shared. I emptied the closet into boxes, folded old clothes that smelled like dryer sheets and thyme. At the back of the top shelf behind a stack of yearbooks, I found a folded piece of notebook paper. It was a letter. Margot's handwriting, rounder than mine, bigger. The letters leaning left instead of right. Dear Arya, it began. I'm sorry I left when Mom was sick. I know you think I'm selfish. Maybe I am. But every time I looked at her in that bed, I saw what I would become if I stayed in this town forever. You're strong enough to watch someone die slowly. I wasn't. That doesn't make me bad. It makes me different. I just wish being different didn't mean being less than you. M. The paper was wrinkled. The ink had faded at the creases. She'd folded and unfolded it more than once. The date at the top was 3 years old, written a year after Mom's death, during the window when Margot was still calling once a week. She never sent it. I stood in her old room with the letter in my hands and the lavender walls around me, and the faint ghost of bass guitar in the floor, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Sadness. The kind that comes from realizing someone you've been furious at was also, in their own smaller way, drowning. I refolded the letter along its original creases. I put it back behind the yearbooks. I closed the closet door. Some things aren't weapons, even when they could be, and I had already decided what kind of fight this would be. The final 2 weeks moved with the strange, compressed rhythm of a countdown. Every day had more tasks than hours, and every task reminded me of the thing I wasn't supposed to mention. I finished the last vendor handoff on a Monday, transferred the florist's contact to the wedding planner, confirmed the table linens, double-checked the string quartet set list. The planner, a woman named Grace who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in bullet points, thanked me 3 times in a single email. Margot did not thank me once. On Tuesday, Margot texted, "Don't wear anything too casual, the Prescotts notice." No greeting, no, "Thanks for handling everything," just an instruction. On Wednesday, my father called. "Just be nice, okay? Don't bring up the old stuff." "What old stuff, Dad?" "You know." A pause. "The mom stuff." I let the pause stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I said, "I'll be there at 6. On Thursday, the day before the rehearsal dinner, I went to my closet and took out a dress I hadn't worn in 5 years. It was my mother's. Simple. Navy blue with a boat neck. She wore it to my high school graduation, to Margot's first communion, to every event that mattered enough for a good dress but not enough for a new one. It was cotton, not silk. It had a small mend at the hem where she'd caught it on a chair leg at a parent-teacher night. I'd had it altered to fit me. The seamstress at the dry cleaner charged me $40 and said, "This is well made. They don't make them like this anymore." I agreed. I hung it on the bedroom door, pressed a wrinkle from the sleeve. The fabric smelled like nothing now. All of Mom's scent had faded years ago, but the weight of it felt right. Not heavy, substantial. My phone buzzed. Vivien. A text. 2 words. "See you Thursday." No context, no explanation, no promise, just a coordinate. She'd see me. At the rehearsal dinner. That was all I needed to know. Thursday arrived the way most important days do, disguised as an ordinary one. The sky was flat. The coffee tasted the same. I ironed my mother's dress and drove to the restaurant and walked through the door, and everything after that was different. The restaurant was called The Trellis, a converted farmhouse at the edge of town with string lights looped through the trees and a gravel parking lot where a valet in a vest was taking keys. I'd driven past it 100 times. I'd never been inside. It was the kind of place that served courses, not meals. The rehearsal dinner was in a private room at the back, behind French doors. Through the glass, I could see the setup before I entered. Long tables arranged in a horseshoe, white linens, napkins folded into cranes, candles, wine glasses, 3 at each setting, for white, red, and champagne. The caterer I'd recommended had outdone herself. I pushed through the doors. The room was already half full. Prescott cousins in blazers, Gerald's brother and his wife, seated quietly in a corner. Drew's groomsmen, clustered near a bar that was too well stocked for the size of the room. I counted the place settings. I didn't mean to. It was instinct. The project manager in me, scanning a room the way you scan a blueprint, looking for what's missing before anyone tells you. 42. I counted again, moving my eyes along the horseshoe. Started from the left, moved right. 42. The guest list had 43 names. I knew because I'd built the spreadsheet. My father was at the center table, the one closest to where Margot and Drew would sit. He was holding a glass of red wine, laughing at something Richard Prescott had said. His sport coat was new, his posture was rehearsed. He did not look toward the door. Margot was at the head of the horseshoe, adjusting a place card with 2 fingers, her rehearsal dress white and fitted. She looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. Her expression didn't change exactly. It tightened. The way a rope tightens when you put weight on it. Not breaking, just reminding you it has a limit. I stood in that doorway with my mother's dress on my body and my mother's letter in my wallet and no place to sit. The string quartet hadn't started yet. The room was full of voices and none of them were saying my name. I took a breath. I walked in. I approached the nearest table, the one where the place cards had last names I recognized as Prescott relatives. A woman in her 50s with a pearl choker glanced up and smiled politely. The kind of smile you give the caterer when she walks by with the bread basket. I didn't sit. There was nowhere to sit. I crossed to the head table. Margot was adjusting a centerpiece, her back partially turned. Drew was beside her, scrolling his phone. I stopped 3 feet away. I think there's been a mix-up with the seating, I said. Margot turned. Her face was composed. Not surprised, not guilty. Prepared. She'd been expecting this. Oh. She looked at the table, then at me, then at the room, where several guests had paused mid-conversation to watch. Her voice was pitched to Carrie, not shouting, projecting. We only reserved seats for important guests. Someone at the Prescott table made a sound, a short exhale, almost a laugh. 2 of Drew's aunts exchanged a glance. The woman in the pearl choker looked down at her plate. Drew kept his eyes on his phone. He hadn't heard. Or he had. I turned to my father. He was 4 seats away, his wine glass halfway to his lips. He set it down. Our eyes met. Don't make a scene, Arya, he said. Quietly. But quiet carries in a room full of people who are listening. I stood still. 5 seconds. Maybe 6. Long enough to feel every pair of eyes in the room land on me and then, one by one, look away. Long enough to see Vivien Prescott at the far end of the horseshoe, her hands folded on the table, watching me the way she'd watched me in the library. Without pity, without urgency, with the patience of someone who has seen this before and knows exactly how it ends. Excuse me, I said. My voice was steady. I'm going to freshen up. I walked to the restroom. My shoes clicked on the hardwood. I didn't hurry. I didn't look back. The restroom door was heavy oak. I closed it behind me and turned the lock. The fluorescent light hummed. The porcelain sink was cold under my hands. The woman in the mirror was wearing her dead mother's dress. She did not look like someone who had nowhere to sit. She looked like someone who had somewhere to go. I pulled the letter from my wallet. The paper was soft now, worn at the folds from months of being pressed against my driver's license. Mom's handwriting was familiar enough to feel like a voice. Put it down when it breaks your back. I read it once, folded it, held it against my palm. The easy choice was to leave, walk to the parking lot, start my car, drive home, and never come back. I'd done harder things than that. I'd spent 14 months watching my mother disappear in a hospital bed. Walking away from a dinner party would be nothing, but walking away would prove Margot right. It would confirm every story she'd told. The difficult sister, the one who couldn't handle family events, the one who made things hard. If I left, the narrative would seal itself shut, and I would be written out of the family not by cruelty but by consensus. They wouldn't even have to lie about it. They'd just say, I wasn't there. My phone buzzed. A text from Vivien. 1 word. Stay. I looked at my face in the mirror, my mother's navy dress, my own eyes. The fluorescent light was unforgiving. It showed everything. Lines I'd earned. Steadiness I'd built. 5 years of showing up for people who forgot to set a chair. I called Denise Cooper. She was a friend. We'd served on the town's community improvement committee together, and she knew Vivien through the library board. She picked up on the second ring. "Can you come to the trellis tomorrow? The Prescott Finch wedding. As my guest." "What's happening?" "I might need someone who can tell the truth when I'm not the right person to say it." She paused for half a beat. "What time?" 2 o'clock. Ceremony at the estate." "I'll be there." I washed my hands. The water was cold. I fixed my lipstick, a shade Mom used to call job interview red. I straightened my collar. I unlocked the door. I walked back into that room and stood against the wall near the bar, 6 feet from the nearest table, visible to anyone who cared to look. The bartender, a young man with a careful part in his hair, was the first person to speak to me since I'd entered the building. "What can I get you?" he said. "Club soda," I said. "Thank you." He handed it to me like I was a guest. I was grateful for that. There are things you see when you stand that you miss when you sit. This is true in conference rooms and construction sites, and it is true at rehearsal dinners where you are not welcome. From my position near the bar, I could see Gerald at the center table. He checked his phone under the tablecloth every 3 minutes, a nervous habit he'd had since the store started struggling. His jaw was set in a way that looked like confidence from across the room, but was actually clenching. I knew the difference because I'd watched him do it for 30 years. I could see Margot at the head table, laughing with her bridesmaids, but her left hand was in her lap, and every few minutes she tore a small piece from the edge of her napkin crane. The cranes she'd spent weeks choosing. She was unraveling her own decoration and didn't realize it. I could see Drew, pleasant and present and entirely oblivious. He watched Margot the way someone watches a television show they enjoy but don't feel strongly about. Fond. Uninvested. At 9:15, Vivien Prescott stood from her seat at the far end of the horseshoe, picked up her wine glass, and walked to the bar. She positioned herself beside me, facing the room, and said nothing for a full minute. Then, without looking at me, "Your mother's dress." I glanced down. The navy cotton, the boat neck, the small mend at the hem. "You recognize it?" Helen wore it to the library's fundraiser dinner in 2014, the year before she was diagnosed. She sat next to me at the head table and told me she'd been wearing it for 20 years and it still fit because she never changed sizes, only opinions. I almost smiled. That sounded exactly like Mom. "She would be very proud," Vivien said, still looking at the room and not at me, "of how you're standing right now." She picked up a fresh glass of wine from the bar, turned and walked back to her seat. She had not raised her voice. She had not needed to. Vivien Prescott did not operate in volume. She operated in precision, and she had just told me, in her own quiet way, that she was ready. I held my club soda. The ice clinked once. The room continued without me, which was fine. It wouldn't continue without me forever. At 9:30, my father stood to give the toast. He tapped his glass with a butter knife, 3 small clinks that silenced the room with the authority of a man who had spent the last 2 years learning how authority worked. "I want to say a few words about family," he began. He talked about the Finch family values: hard work, loyalty, showing up. He talked about how Helen, my late wife, for those who didn't have the privilege of knowing her, would have loved this night. Would have loved seeing her daughter so happy. Would have loved the Prescott family for welcoming our little family into theirs. "Helen always said that family is the table you set, not the table you sit at," he said. He paused for effect. The room murmured appreciatively. "My mother never said that. My mother said the kitchen feeds people and the dining room impresses them." My father had rewritten her words the way Margot had rewritten her story, not with malice, but with the casual conviction of someone who had told the lie so many times it had become, to him, indistinguishable from the truth. Margot teared up on cue. Drew squeezed her hand. Patricia Prescott dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin crane. I stood against the wall and listened to my father describe a family that existed only in the version of events that kept the Prescotts comfortable. Every word was a lie I could itemize. Every sentiment was a room I'd been asked to leave. My cousin Robbie caught my eye from a corner table. Gerald's nephew, a plumber from the next town over. The only Finch relative who'd texted me in the last month. He mouthed something across the room. "Are you okay?" I nodded. Gerald raised his glass. "To family," he said. "The most important thing we have." Everyone drank. I raised my club soda from the wall. Nobody noticed. The gesture existed only for me, and that was enough, because tomorrow it wouldn't be just for me. My father was right about one thing. Family was the most important thing. He just got confused about which direction that word pointed. He aimed it at the people who could give him something. He forgot about the person who had been giving everything. I left the rehearsal dinner at 10:15. Nobody said goodbye. The bartender nodded as I passed. Vivien was still seated, her hands folded, her face unreadable. Our eyes met once. She inclined her head. Not a nod, not a bow. An acknowledgement, like a general reviewing the field the night before. The drive home took 11 minutes. The road was empty. My headlights caught a deer at the tree line, frozen mid-step, eyes gold. I slowed. It crossed. Life went on. At home, I hung my mother's dress on the closet door. Tomorrow I wouldn't wear it. Tonight had been Mom's night, the last time I'd carry her into a room that didn't deserve her. Tomorrow would be mine. I laid out my own clothes. A charcoal-wrapped dress I'd bought for a colleague's retirement party. Simple silver earrings. Low heels I could stand in for hours. Nothing borrowed. Nothing inherited. Mine. I sat on my bed with a notebook and wrote down what I knew. Not a plan. A list of facts. Margot had told the Prescotts I was mentally unstable. Gerald owed Richard Prescott $85,000. My name had been highlighted red on the guest list. I had not been given a seat at the rehearsal dinner. The caterer, the florist, the string quartet, the venue. All vendors I had personally coordinated. These were facts. Not accusations, not interpretations. Facts. I did not plan a speech. I did not plan a confrontation. I planned to be present, to be visible, and to tell the truth if anyone asked. Vivien would be there. Denise would be there. Cousin Robbie would be there. The wedding planner, Grace, knew exactly who had done the work. If the truth came out, it would come out because people who saw it decided to speak. Not because I had engineered a scene. There's a difference between revenge and refusing to be invisible. I texted Vivien. "Thank you for tonight." She replied 40 seconds later. "Tomorrow will be different." I texted Denise. 2:00, ceremony entrance. Denise. Already ironed my dress. I set my alarm for 6. The wedding was at 2. I had 8 hours. I used them to sleep. Deeply, actually. The way you sleep when you've finally stopped carrying something you weren't supposed to carry alone. The wedding morning was the color of pearl. Overcast but bright. The kind of sky that doesn't commit to sun or rain and makes photographers nervous. I drank my coffee standing at the kitchen counter. My own kitchen. My own counter. Granite. Which I'd saved for and installed myself 2 years ago. Mom would have liked it. I arrived at the estate at 1:30. The Prescott family property was 10 acres of groomed lawn, a white tent the size of a small airport, and a garden path lined with hydrangeas that someone had been paid serious money to make look casual. String lights were threaded through the tree canopy. A string quartet was warming up near the altar. The same musicians I'd booked 7 months earlier after Margot's first choice canceled and her second choice didn't return calls. I found my seat. Table 9, near the kitchen entrance, where the catering staff would be running trays back and forth for the next 4 hours. The table was round, set for 8, and positioned behind a structural pole that partially blocked the view of the altar. Margot had not assigned me to the worst table by accident. She had assigned me to the table where I would be most easily forgotten. I sat, checked the place cards. My table mates were Prescott distant cousins, an elderly couple from Virginia, a college student checking his phone, and 2 women in their 40s who appeared to be in-laws of in-laws, the outermost orbit of a wedding solar system. I smoothed my napkin, adjusted my water glass, felt nothing in particular. I had expected this. Grace, the wedding planner, walked by with a clipboard and a headset. She stopped when she saw me. "Arya?" She looked at the table number, then back at me. "Why are you at table 9? Ask the bride." Grace opened her mouth, closed it. She had coordinated with me for 4 months, had my cell phone number memorized, had sent me thank you coffee twice, had told me I was the most organized family contact she'd ever worked with. She looked at table 9. She looked at the kitchen entrance behind me. She understood. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. I chose to be here." She squeezed my shoulder once and walked away. Her heels clicked on the flagstone. She didn't look back, but I saw her write something on her clipboard. The ceremony was beautiful. I'll give them that. Drew's vows were handwritten on index cards that trembled slightly in his fingers. He talked about trust and honesty and building a life with someone who makes you better. He meant every word. That was the cruel part. Margot's vows were polished, not read from cards, but memorized, delivered with the timing of someone who had rehearsed them in the mirror. She talked about family. She talked about roots. She mentioned the strength my mother gave me, and 200 guests made soft, approving sounds. She mentioned family twice. She did not mention me. I sat in the back row, behind the pole, next to the college student who was watching a basketball game on mute. Denise sat to my left. She'd arrived at 1:50 in a green dress with a linen jacket, and she hadn't asked a single question. She just sat down, crossed her ankles, and waited. Vivien was front row, opposite side, white suit, pearl brooch at the collar. She watched the ceremony with the same expression she wore when sorting library books. Attentive, categorizing, filing things away for later use. Gerald walked Margot down the aisle. He was crying. Real tears. I could tell because his nose turned red the way it always did when he was genuinely moved. For one terrible, tender moment, I saw my sister the way I used to see her. The little girl who followed me to the mailbox. The kid who knocked on my door at midnight. The person I'd loved before the story got rewritten. Something shifted in me then. Not revenge. Not anger. Something quieter. I realized I wasn't there to punish anyone. I was there to stop being absent from my own life, to stand in the room where I'd been erased and let the people who could see me say what they saw. They kissed. Everyone clapped. I clapped too. My hands made the same sound as everyone else's. From the back row, behind a pole, at a wedding I'd helped plan and nearly been uninvited from, my applause was indistinguishable from theirs. And for a few seconds, that felt like its own kind of truth. If you've ever sat at the back while someone else took credit for the life you helped build, you know this feeling. You're not invisible. You're waiting. And waiting is not the same as giving up. If this story is hitting close to home, drop a like and tell me in the comments. What was the moment you stopped waiting? I read every single one. The reception started at 4 with cocktails under the tent and a jazz trio that transitioned to the string quartet when dinner service began. Table 9 was served last. I know because I counted the courses going out the kitchen entrance behind me. Tables 1 through 8 got their salads at 4:45. We got ours at 5:12. I ate. I made conversation. The elderly couple from Virginia told me about their grandson's soccer tournament. The college student asked me to pass the salt. One of the in-laws of in-laws asked the question that changed the temperature of the table. "So how do you know the bride?" She was maybe 24, with sharp eyes and a cocktail ring that caught the light. She asked it the way you ask someone at a party, casually, while buttering a roll. "She's my sister," I said. The woman stopped buttering. The elderly man from Virginia looked up from his salad. The college student locked his phone. "The bride's sister is at table 9? The young woman said. "Not to me. To the table." I shrugged. The seating chart was very detailed. The young woman looked at the head table where Margot was laughing with her bridesmaids, champagne in hand. Then she looked at table 9. At the kitchen entrance behind us. At the pole blocking our view. "Huh," she said. And then, quieter. That's something. Word moved the way word moves at weddings, in whispers between bites, in glances across centerpieces, in the careful way people lean toward each other when they've just learned something that rearranges the room. By the time the main course arrived, 3 people at neighboring tables had turned to look at me, not with pity, with curiosity. The best man's toast came between courses. He was Drew's college roommate, a real estate broker who spoke in rehearsed anecdotes. He talked about Drew's character. Then he talked about Margot. She practically raised herself after losing her mom, he said. Independent, fierce, the kind of woman who stands on her own. My fork was in my hand. I set it down carefully, beside the plate, tines up. The best man had never met me. He wouldn't have said that if he had, but he didn't need to meet me. He'd met Margot's version of me. And that version didn't eat at table 9. That version didn't exist at all. Between the main course and dessert, there is a window at every wedding where the formal program loosens and anyone with standing can ask for the microphone. It's the moment when uncles tell embarrassing stories and college friends read poems they wrote on napkins. It is, by tradition, the most unscripted part of the evening. Vivien Prescott stood at 6:47. I know the time because the college student at my table checked his phone and I saw the clock. She walked to the podium with the measured pace of someone who has given speeches before and doesn't rush. The DJ handed her the microphone. The room quieted, not because she asked for silence, but because when Vivien Prescott moved toward a microphone, Prescott stopped talking. It was reflexive, generational. I want to talk about family, she said. Her voice was clear, unhurried. Not the idea of family, the practice of it. She talked about Helen Finch, my mother. She described the woman who had started the children's reading hour at the Millbrook Public Library 22 years ago. The woman who had sat next to Vivien at a fundraiser dinner and made her laugh so hard the wine almost came out her nose. The woman who had raised 2 daughters and run a household and kept the books for a hardware store and still found time, every Tuesday and Thursday, to read picture books to other people's children. Helen's older daughter continued that reading hour after Helen passed, Vivien said. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, for 5 years. She is sitting at the back of this room. She paused. 200 people turned. Not all at once, in a wave, starting from the front tables and rolling backward until every face in the tent was pointed at table 9. That woman is the bride's sister, Vivien said. She planned this wedding's catering. She chose these flowers. She coordinated every vendor in this room. She was not given a seat at the rehearsal dinner last night. The silence was physical. You could feel it press against the tent walls. Drew looked at Margot. Margot's face had gone white. Not embarrassed white, but the white of someone watching a structure they built start to lean. Gerald gripped the edge of the table. I don't say this to embarrass anyone, Vivien said. I say it because Helen asked me to watch over her daughters. Both of them. And I have. She set the microphone on the podium. She sat down. The room had 200 people in it. For the first time in 5 years, every single one of them was looking at me. 4 seconds of silence. I counted them the way I'd counted the place settings, instinctively, because counting was the only thing that kept me anchored to the room instead of floating above it. Then Drew stood. His chair scraped against the flagstone. He didn't look at Margot. He walked across the tent, past tables, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and stopped in front of table 9. Is this true? He said. Which part? All of it. Yes. He stood there for a moment with his hands at his sides and his jaw working the way people's jaws work when they're recalculating. Not in anger, in recalibration. He was rebuilding his understanding of the woman he'd married 6 hours ago, and the process was visible on his face the way a crack is visible in glass. You can see the fracture spreading even if the pain hasn't fallen yet. He turned and walked back toward the head table. Margot had stood. Her champagne glass was still in her hand, tilted at an angle that was spilling without her noticing. She's exaggerating, Margot said. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. She always does this. She makes everything about her. Cousin Robbie stood from his corner table. I was at the rehearsal dinner last night. There was no seat for her. I saw it. Gerald pushed back his chair. This is not the time or the place. Gerald. Vivien's voice, from across the tent. Not raised. Just aimed. It was never the time. That was the problem. Gerald sat down. Like a string had been cut. His wine glass was empty. He stared at the tablecloth. Margot looked around the room. At her bridesmaids, who were studying their plates. At Patricia Prescott, who was watching her son. At Drew, who was watching her with the face of a man seeing something for the first time. You don't understand, Margot said. To no one. To everyone. Her mascara was running. These were real tears. Not the rehearsed kind from the ceremony, the kind that come from the collapse of a thing you spent years constructing. She set down her glass. She picked up her dress hem. She walked to the bridal suite. The door closed behind her. Drew didn't follow. The string quartet kept playing. Nobody was listening to them. They hadn't been all night. The reception continued the way a car continues after you take your foot off the gas. With momentum, not intention. The DJ played songs. People danced. The cake was cut. Though Margot came out for it with reapplied makeup and a smile that had been reconstructed from materials that weren't quite the same shade as the original. Drew stood beside her for the photos. He held the knife. They posed. He did not kiss her for the picture. The photographer asked twice. Guests talked in clusters. I heard my name in fragments. The sister. Table 9. Can you imagine? The way you hear your name in a crowded room, always from a direction you can't pinpoint. Patricia Prescott found me near the dessert table. She was holding a plate of petit fours she wasn't eating. Her face was composed. She was a Prescott. Composed was the factory setting. Why didn't you say something sooner? She asked. I was told not to make a scene. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she set her plate down and walked away. She didn't apologize. But she didn't defend Margot either, and for a Prescott, silence was its own kind of verdict. My father found me outside, near the valet stand. The tent glowed behind us. The string lights in the trees made everything look warmer than it was. The gravel crunched under his shoes. Dress shoes, not work boots. Shoes he'd bought for evenings like this. You have no idea what you've done, he said. I didn't do anything, Dad. Vivien did. And she did it because she cared about what you stopped caring about. He flinched. It was small. A tightening around the eyes. A shift in his shoulders. But I saw it. I'd been watching my father my whole life. I knew every flinch he had. That's not fair, he said. Neither was the seating chart. He looked at me the way he used to look at the store inventory when the numbers didn't add up. With the frustrated helplessness of a man who knows the problem is real but doesn't have the tools to fix it. He walked into the parking lot. The valet offered him a ticket. He waved the man away. He'd forgotten where he'd parked. I watched him go. His shoulders were lower than I'd ever seen them. Even lower than at the funeral. 1 month after the wedding, the facts arranged themselves into a shape I could live with. Margot and Drew were still married. Drew had insisted on couples counseling before the honeymoon. They went to a therapist in the next town over. Not Millbrook, where everyone now knew, but somewhere with enough distance that the receptionist wouldn't already have an opinion. I heard this from Vivien, who heard it from Drew, who was, she said, handling it the way a decent man handles learning he was lied to. Badly, but with effort. Gerald's loan did not vanish. Richard Prescott didn't call it in the way my father had feared, but he did formalize it. Proper paperwork, scheduled payments, interest. No more gentleman's handshake. No more favorable terms. Gerald started selling excess inventory to make the first 2 payments. The store was still open. It was smaller now. That might have been the right size all along. Margot sent me one text, 3 weeks after the wedding. You ruined my day. I read it once. I did not respond. I considered briefly sending the screenshot of the guest list with my name in red. I decided against it. That screenshot was not a weapon. It was a receipt. And I didn't need her to see it. I needed me to have seen it. Vivien invited me to Sunday dinner at the Prescott house. Just dinner. No agenda. She introduced me to Richard and Patricia not as Margot's sister, but as Aria from the library. Patricia served the salad herself. Richard asked about the hardware store and seemed, for the first time, genuinely interested in the answer. It was the first time I had been introduced to the Prescott family as a whole person, and it took Vivien Prescott and a rearranged wedding and 5 years of invisible labor to get there. Cousin Robbie started coming to the library on Tuesdays. He read picture books with a plumber's confidence. Loud, expressive, occasionally mispronouncing words in ways that made the kids laugh harder. He was good at it. I told him so. I did not ruin my sister's wedding. I stood in the room where she tried to erase me, and I let the people who could see me say what they saw. That is not revenge. That is presence. And presence, it turns out, is the one thing you cannot plan for when your plan depends on someone being absent. I went back to my father's house on a Tuesday in October. He'd asked me to pick up the last of Mom's things, the box of letters, a few photo albums, a jewelry box with a broken clasp that he'd never fixed. He said he'd leave them on the porch. He didn't say he wouldn't be home. He wasn't. The house was unlocked, which was how things worked in Millbrook. I let myself in. The kitchen was the same. The laminate counter. The cast iron skillet hanging from the same hook. The window over the sink still streaked in the corner where Mom used to lean her forehead against the glass while waiting for the coffee to brew. I ran my hand along the counter. The surface was rough in places. Years of knife marks and hot pans and elbows resting on it during late dinners. My fingerprints left faint marks in the dust. My father had not been cooking here. The oven light was off. The dish towel was dry. I thought about what Mom had said. The kitchen feeds people. The dining room impresses them. Know which room you belong in. I'd spent 5 years trying to earn a seat at the dining room table. Not the Prescott's table. My own family's table. The one where I was supposed to belong by default. By blood. By 33 years of showing up. And every time I pulled out a chair, someone moved it. The counter was still there. The chair had never been there. That was the lesson. I took the letter from my wallet. The one Mom wrote. The one about putting things down when they break your back. I unfolded it one last time. The creases were so deep now that the paper almost separated along the lines. Her handwriting tilted right. Her love tilted toward whoever needed it most. I set the letter on the counter, next to the skillet, in the spot where she used to leave notes for my father when she went to bed early. I smoothed the paper flat with my palm. Then I picked up the box from the porch, got in my car, and drove to the library. It was Tuesday. Reading hour was at 4. I was the first one there, as always. My mother taught me where I belonged. It took me 5 years and a missing chair to listen. Some tables aren't worth sitting at, and some chairs aren't missing. They're making room for you to stand. If Aria's story reminded you that your worth isn't measured by who makes space for you, then this channel is for you. Hit subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and check the description for more stories about families, boundaries, and the quiet courage it takes to walk away from the table. I'll see you in the next one.